Welcome to the Trailhead from UltraSignup, where big adventures begin. Trail running is so much more than just a sport. It's a community, a culture, a way of seeing the world. On this show, we're not dissecting splits or debating shoe specs. We're here to get to the heart of it all, the people, the places, and the stories that speak to the soul of the sport. Join me, Zoe Rome, and my co-host, Brendan Leonard, as we'll bring you conversations with the everyday athletes, local legends, quirky characters, and creative minds who make trail running what it is. Messy, joyful, gritty, and deeply human. Because it's not just about chasing finish lines. It's about the friendships forged on long climbs, the lessons learned in the pain cave, and the weird, wild moments that remind us why this sport is about so much more than the miles. Today, we're diving into the weird, messy, beautiful space between our ears. We're joined by Steve Magnus, performance scientist, author, and one of the loudest voices calling BS on some of the old school ideas of mental toughness. You might know him from The Science of Running, a Steve Magnus deep cut, Peak Performance, or Do Hard Things. But today we're talking a lot about his newest book, Win the Inside Game. It's all about shifting your focus from chasing outcomes to building real self-awareness because, as Steve says, true toughness isn't about gritting your teeth and pushing harder. It's about learning how to navigate discomfort with skill. So I'm excited to dive in today with you, Steve.
Thanks so much for having me. I love what you all do and excited to chat.
Yeah, so you've coached elite runners, you've worked in professional sports and written a couple books about high performance, but you sort of pivot in this most recent book a little bit from pushing harder to really emphasizing the idea of getting curious. Why that shift, and why do you think that matters or might be sticky for athletes?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my career, it's one shift after another. So I think it fits kind of my personality because I go where my interests kind of lie. And in this book, I think what I noticed over the last couple years is that we needed more of that following our curiosity, more of that exploration. And even with the elite athletes I was coaching. So I still work with some elite marathon athletes, and I was noticing more and more that it was about not the X's and O's, not the training, not even like how do we get tough in this moment, but like how do we set our lives up so that we can perform at a high level? And a lot of that came with essentially tuning down how much running mattered to them. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive for someone who's, again, a professional athlete making a living at this. But I kept noticing time and time again, people who would like turn that volume down on their runner identity would all of a sudden start performing well. So it got me curious to kind of understand this both inside running and then far beyond it to see if there was something there.
Yeah, I would jump in, Steve. There's a chapter in Win the Inside Game where you kind of, correct me if I don't have this exactly right, but you talk about how being successful at something such as running can actually make that thing less fun for the person. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the classic thing that most of us have experienced, which is what happens when you turn your hobby into a job. Is at first you're like, this is going to be great. I'm going to turn the thing that I love doing into the thing that gives me financial freedom. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh dear God, this sucks. The same thing happens in kind of running is we get success. We start identifying with the pursuit. And at first that identifying with the pursuit helps us because we're more motivated. It's easier to get out the door when we go from thinking I run to I am a runner. But like most things, the thing that helps us get good is often the impetus that prevents us from being great. Meaning it goes from something that fuels us to something that all of a sudden gets in our way. And one of the reasons that it does that is all of a sudden the stakes are higher because it's not just, hey, I run this race and, you know, if I do really well, that's great. I feel good about it and I go home and I live my life. It becomes a kind of existential crisis where every race or even every workout, like my identity is at stake. It's like am I, Steve, a failure because I didn't run my PR or place top 10 at this major event? And all of a sudden, we go from wanting to do the thing to having this little voice in our head that is telling us like, hey, what if we don't start? What if we avoid the thing? What if like I get exposed in doing this thing? And it's only gotten worse because of, everyone's on Strava and social media, and it feels like we're being judged all the time. So I think it's kind of it's always been there from a human perspective, but I think it's elevated like tenfold because of the internet of everything world we live in.
Right. You write about trading that external scorecard for an internal one. So what are the things that a lot of us are maybe used to chasing Strava segments, podiums, public praise, a UTMB index, like every day there's a new number that I can use to shame myself publicly with. How can but we also need some of those things to some extent. So how can we find that balance between throwing our phones into the ocean and disconnecting from Strava, but still wanting to have some measure of progress and some measure of this does still mean something to me, but how do we recalibrate that?
Yeah, I think you've nailed the problem exactly, which is it's not going to the other extreme. It's not me saying everyone should go live like a monk and act like it's 1970 and we have no technology anymore. Like it's here, it's part of our world, we have to acknowledge it. To me, I think the best illustration is you have to hold two things at once and you have to find the balance in that works for you. And I think Sarah Hall, the elite marathoner, is a perfect example of this. I was fortunate early in my career to work with her for a number of years, and she's a phenomenal human being, and she practices what she preaches. And in several of her more recent marathons and races, she's talked about setting big goals. And I'll tell you, behind the scenes, like Sarah set the biggest goals. I remember when she was about to run her first marathon and she was like, I want to set the debut American record. And I'm just like, hold on, wait a minute. Let's like step back a little bit. But she always dreams and thinks big. And part of it, she needs that, right? That's what fuels her. That's what determines her. But at the same point, Sarah's incredible at recognizing and saying, okay, wait a minute, this goal that initially fueled things is now getting in my way. And she has this wonderful quote, and I'll butcher it, but the part I remember is, when the goal starts stealing my peace, that means it's time to throw it away. And when she set the American record in the half marathon a couple years ago, a couple weeks before that race, she realized, hey, the half marathon, the record, the dialing into the pace is driving me insane. I'm going to change my goal. I'm going to let that go and say, now my new goal is to just get in the pack, like be surrounded by a bunch of other wonderful women and get in there and compete and see what we can do. And that's again, it's still about competing, but it takes the edge off of this number, this self-defining thing that gets it. Another example from her that I love is when she set the American record in the marathon, the Masters marathon record. And what she did is the first, I think it was 14, 15 miles, is she looked at her watch. She saw she was on pace. She used the number, but then around mile 15 or so, she takes the watch and throws it in the crowd. Which, again, what is that? It's utilizing the data, the numbers, saying this is important to me, but then recognizing at some point is like, hey, me obsessively looking at my watch every mile and having that stroke of fear of like, oh my gosh, am I going to be a couple seconds too slow or too fast? Like that's getting in the way. I put myself in a good spot. It's time to throw the watch away and just trust myself and be in the moment and compete. And that's where it is. So again, it's that nuance of knowing, okay, what is going to motivate me? And at the same time saying, okay, when is this going to get in the way? And I need to throw this by the wayside and have some other markers of effort, success, pulling me towards things.
Time to get Sarah racing trail and ultra is what I'm hearing.
I'm also thinking that was probably a free watch. Like, wow.
Yeah, I wouldn't throw my watch away. I'd look for someone I knew and hand it off. But I think in the trail and ultra, it's even more important to a degree, because like the races are so freaking long often in ultras. Like you go through cycles where you're in your own head, where you're feeling motivated, when you're not, when you see a clock, when you get the report at the next trailhead where you're like, oh, the next guy or gal is an hour ahead of you, and you can spiral. And I think there it's like you have to almost be able to, it's again the nuance, zooming in and zooming out. And what I remember is way back in the 1970s, there was this phenomenal early study that took basically all the best American marathoners at the time. Again, the 70s, no one knew what they were doing. So everyone said yes to any research. So you had like people like Frank Shorter, Olympic gold medalist, and others who just said, yeah, like put us through the test. We'll test everything. And what they found is from the psychological side is during the marathon is that those people compared to the next rung down of elite amateurs, we'll call it, is those marathoners at the highest level is they were able to just like pivot and shift their focus and attention much better. Meaning there wasn't one key way to handle the pain or suffering or like have a goal. It's that people like Frank Shorter were like, okay, this worked at mile 16, but is it working at mile 17? So I better pull another strategy out of my head and focus on something else. And I think that is the lesson for us, and especially at the ultras and the trails where chaos reigns, is you've got to have a bunch of different strategies and know when looking at the watch might be able to fuel you and when it's going to drive you insane. And you need to say, okay, no, I need to redefine my success. I need to redefine my goal. I need to shift my attention to something else that matters. And that's the name of the game.
I have a question that relates to that, but first I wanted to ask you, in the book, you have this like laundry list of sort of like quote unquote failures that you've had in life, which I think a lot of us can identify with. I have some second place trophies that my mom dropped off here, but most of them are further down than that. Can you talk a little bit about how that shaped your worldview, having these sort of like, oh, I almost got it. And, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm world class at anything, it is being really good at something and then just falling short of the ultimate prize. And I won't go through all the lists, but the brief list is I ran a 401 mile in high school and then never ran faster. You know, it would have been nice to have 350 something in front of my name, but I was just shy multiple occasions. In college, I missed the NCAA national championships by 6/100ths of a second. It doesn't get like, I don't know how you get any closer than 6/100ths of a second in a 10K. It just doesn't happen. When I was coaching at the University of Houston, we finished second, third, and second. Third, second, and third at consecutive national track and field championships. The athlete I coach was winning by 30 meters in one of those and then fell on the final lap in the steeplechase. Like, you don't get closer than that. I've published 5 books. I've sold, I think at this point, probably 1 million copies. I've made, multiple national and international bestseller lists, but I've fallen basically one place shy on multiple occasions of the only bestseller list that anyone pays attention to, the New York Times list. So I could go on and on these, but I'm really good at getting really freaking close and having success and just falling short. And I think what it tells you, maybe not the first or second time, but eventually it happens enough so it beats you into your head where you have to realize this, is that the point is the journey. The point is, and it sounds cliche, but you've got to figure out some way to handle that and realize that, like, the point was you went on this journey, you put yourself in position, and even if it didn't come through, like, you are the same person, whether you ran 401 or 359, like, that's not going to change you. What made you was going on that journey, putting in that training and saying, like, hey, how good can we be? Like, let's give myself a shot. And it's the same in writing. It's in the same as coaching. It's the act of doing and putting yourself in the arena that helps create you. And then the second part of that is, I think it really teaches you that, like, resilience is kind of, again, to a degree up to you, because you craft the story that you tell yourselves. So a couple years ago, I was fortunate to speak on a panel with a bunch of like NBA and WNBA, stars. And it was really crazy because I was like, why in the world am I here? But one of the things that I heard from Sue Bird is they asked her, have you ever choked? And she stops and she thinks for a minute and she said, I don't know, but I've missed a hell of a lot of shots. And to me, that gets at it is like, we have the opinion. Do I consider my 401 instead of 359 a choke job? Or do I say, hey, I was in the arena, I gave everything I had and I missed the shot, but I'm still going to line up the next time I'm in that situation or a similar one and give myself a shot. And what I also realized in that conversation, I think it was the president of Dartmouth who said this, who was a former sports psychologist, who said essentially the most important story is the one we tell ourselves. So when it comes to handling difficult things or failure, like, what story are you going to craft out of that? And I get it. In the moment, probably not a very good one. But when you have time and perspective, you get to start crafting, okay, what does this mean to me? How am I going to get back on the horse? How am I going to use this going forward? And if you do that wisely, you're going to be more resilient. And then also you're going to have, be more mentally well adjusted in taking on your next pursuits.
I want to follow that up with, you have a good example from a football coach in the book, yelling at his players after a loss for not being serious and taking it seriously. And you're saying, like, this is what we think we should do. We should be mad about this loss. And the team goes on to like have a completely humiliating loss the next week. They didn't do better. They didn't get motivated by it. And I have a similar background from like just high school football. And I think I didn't really react well to like these sports where we have a clear winner and a clear loser. I'm curious what you think of adults like myself signing up for ultra marathons, where you're like, oh, okay, 350 people signed up, at least 300 and some of us are going to be losers. We're not going to win. And I don't line up thinking I'm going to win this, or even I'm going to win my age division, or maybe if you get it down far enough, I could win like the 46-year-old male dad, whatever. I could do that, but I'm not going to try to win. So what do you think is in it for us, and why do we do that?
I mean, I think it's healthy to do that. And here's why, because if we only define things by, hey, I can win at this, there would be very few people doing anything, right? And this is part of the problem with our modern world is like, we evolved to live in local communities where, in a tribe of 100 people, you would have probably been one of the top ultra runners in that tribe and had some significance and use, right? Because there's like 100 people. And that's what we evolved to find like significance and status in. But now, like, we line up and we compare ourselves to everybody. Like, I joke to my wife all the time, who is a better runner than I ever was, is that if you compared our like 6th grade mile times, if we knew each other and we're in the same grade at the time, I tell her all the time, I was like, you would have beat me. And then I probably wouldn't have taken up running because, 6th grade Steve would have been like, I just got my ass kicked by a girl. Like, I'm not good at this stuff, because that's how a 6th grade boy would think. Right. And the point is, if our comparison is so wide, it demotivates us. So what you're getting at in endurance sport, and why I love it so much, is like, we figured out the secret, which is we don't have to define ourselves by like who wins and everyone else is losers. We get to define success in ways that matter to us. Meaning, maybe you're signing up for that thing because like it's ultra and it's like, hey, this sounds really challenging. I'm going to be in my head for a really freaking long time. And I'm going to find something else out about myself. Whether I finish 200, first, or 300th, everybody is finding out something about themselves and having to navigate something. And I think that is a lesson for life, is if we all had that to a degree, we'd be in a better place. Individually, I don't know what everybody who signs up for a trail race or ultra is thinking or motivating. But I'll tell you this, is because of the nature of it, unlike many other sports, it's not, I'm signing up for this to win this so I can be a professional and make a ton of money on that, because like that's just not a reality in the sport. So what happens is you have to have something deeper, something intrinsic to you that is saying, hey, this is a worthwhile time for me at this point in my life, and like let's go for it and see what happens.
Yeah, usually the free t-shirt you get when you sign up, usually not quite worth it. I think an interesting sort of tension that you hit on and that you just sort of touched on there is sort of trying to right size our comparison points, because right now the way that things are set up with the internet and sort of these online virtual like ambiguous communities, it has sort of like skewed our comparison points for where we see that we fit in like in the world at large, and even like the ultra running community, because like now I can get on UltraSignup and I can see like compared to all other 30-year-old women exactly how good I am of all 30-year-old women that live in the United States, like 3 clicks away. And that's a pretty tough comparison point. So like but you sort of propose belonging and like developing a true sense of belonging and community as being, if not an antidote, a way to kind of like recalibrate our comparison points. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's holding two things at once. It's the reality that to a degree is helpful on a larger stage, because like we know where everyone is, right? And we can say, hey, you know, Susie over here is doing this, and maybe I think I'm as good as Susie, so I'll give it a shot. And in some senses that raises our game, but other senses it can demotivate us and cause us to be like, why in the world am I trying? Like I'm ranked, you know, number 5,998 in my age group in this category. Like this sucks. Like I'm not very good. So I think there's a couple things. I think one is perspective, is we have to be able to zoom out and ask like, okay, like not everyone's going to be a champion in this. Not everyone's going to fall in line with this, but like zoom out and stop seeing it in our narrow world. And I would challenge you, if you talk to non-runners and I go up to them and I say
find them in the wild.
Yeah,
you approach
find them
people
in the wild, yes, that aren't in our local community, which is a rarity. But when I do, like if I told them I ran a 4:30 mile or a 4:05 mile, to them, they just be like, whatever, that seems really freaking fast. And it's the same if I told someone I ran 2:45 for the marathon or 2:15. To the outside world, it all seems unbelievable. And it's the same if I walk up to someone and I say, hey, I just finished a 50 miler, even if I was, 20 hours behind whoever won, it seems unbelievable. And again, sometimes we get stuck so narrowly in our niche where it's like, we think this minutia like is self-defining, but the reality is if we zoom out, like it doesn't freaking matter to most of the world. Okay, that's number one. So we create this idea in our head. The second part of it is I think we need to ground ourselves more in our communities that matter. So I mentioned like we meant to grow up and live in a tribe of 100 people or so, right? Instead of like looking online and being like, hey, where do I fall in this Strava ranking group of random people that I have no clue and don't really know? Why don't you look at how you're dealing with and how you're progressing and how you're helping the people in your local running community? How do you stack up, maybe not performance wise, but in terms of showing up and doing the work and like, showing up to help other people in your local running community or run club or training group or whatever it is? It's important. And B, is those people are going to be able to hold you accountable and like be there to support you when you have a bad race, because they're going to have more perspective. So instead of like seeing things on whatever ranking system, I like to judge things in our local community, because like, A, we're going to get more honest feedback on how we can actually get better at the things we care about. And B, we're going to accept that honest feedback, because we know that those people have our back and aren't just going to be like internet trolls trying to make us feel miserable because they're just trying to make themselves feel better by like trashing everyone online.
It's a very cool, healthy community we have.
Sometimes I look around at the starting line and think that everybody in this lined up for the race is like the psychopath in their office. Like everyone's just like, oh yeah, Kevin, boy, that guy goes and runs 50-mile races. Like, what a nut, and that's every single person there, so it's going back to your local community thing. You had this post on your website talking about intense moments in youth sports that I thought was really interesting, where you say, we think that the person that is, going kind of bananas at their kid's sporting event, we always say, oh, they're just trying to live vicariously through their child or whatever. We assume they had, dreams of being a star quarterback and they didn't achieve those. So now that they have a child, they're doing that. But you're suggesting that that it's the only place that a lot of adults have that's left to feel something. And I've heard people say before that cheering for a sports team is the only way men feel like they're allowed to show emotion nowadays. And, sorrow, joy, whatever. I wonder if you can kind of talk about that a little bit. My favorite line in the piece is, the antidote is to do real things in the real world with real people. But can you kind of talk a little bit about that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the bottom line on this, is that if you look at the normal person, maybe not the person signing up to run ultra marathons or trail runs, because that will make you feel something. But the normal everyday person, like, what we know is that they often go to a job that feels kind of like, I'm numbed out. I'm going through the motions. I don't really know what this matters, but I'm going to enter these things on a spreadsheet and do it. Right. They often spend way too much time on social media. The loneliness numbers are up. The amount of time that we spend with others in the real world is down. And if we think about it, like, when are the only times we feel something, right? We feel those emotions, that joy, that whatever, that sorrow, that pain, the something real. Well, we either feel it trolling people online, where we get like a hit of either feel good or feel miserable dopamine and other things, where it's like, oh, I'm going to be an asshole online or whatever have you. Or we have to get it somewhere else in the real world. And I think when it comes to youth sports, this is often what happens, is that people don't have an avenue to feel something like real that is engaging. And then also, they don't have moments in their life where they are essentially locked in and attuned, paying attention to something. Because if you look at the parents on the sideline of youth sports, and I done this many times because my wife is an elementary school teacher, so I get dragged to all these kids games, is like, they're not on their phones for once. They're like locked in. They're like paying attention. They're living and dying by every, missed free kick or whatever have you at the 8-year-old soccer game. And they feel something. And I just don't think that there are many avenues for that, because we're, numbed out by our phones and just scrolling endlessly. We're not doing real things in the real world with real people that much. When we go experience things like concerts or whatever have you, where we take out our phones to like capture it instead of like live it and feel it. So youth sports is one of the only avenues. And the other thing I'll say is it's, I felt this as a coach. Right? When you stop competing at a high level, what do most athletes do? They get into coaching.
Or gambling?
Or gambling, right? Why? If you look at, and let's take it outside of running, for example, you look at professional sports, all these people who make millions of dollars, like, start going into coaching, right? Or gambling. And what do those things do? They give you a rush and a high, right? And one is not very productive, and one might be a little bit more productive, hopefully. But like, it's the closest thing that you can get to feeling that rush of being on the field, and like the pain and suffering and anxiety, and just the rush of an elation of winning and sorrow of losing, the rush of feelings that we experience. And for the athletes or non-competitors out there are very few moments where you feel that elation, and you get, to your point, Brendan, is you actually get to express it. Because especially for men, we're told like, hey, numb that shit out. Like, don't if you have a failure at work, like, don't show expression. Or to the point earlier, like after a tough loss, like don't laugh and find, some way to get out of it. Just like sit in sorrow in your own head and be miserable. And sure, that might be feeling something, but nothing good. And I think youth sports is just one of those few avenues where parents can feel again.
Yeah, I would prefer that people did not drink 3 beers and then start yelling at the players at the baseball games I go to. Like, I know you're feeling something, sort of, but I wish you just take care of that at your job instead of while sitting next to me at the baseball game.
But so here's the thing is there's research on this in relationships in particular. Like if you look at doing, we'll just call it interesting and challenging things that force you to pay attention in your relationship. So they've studied things like doing those escape rooms, right? Where you're locked in a room without your phone really and have to figure out all these clues and get out. When we do those with our significant other and you survey people after and then weeks after, it boosts the power of the relationship. You feel more connected to that other person. Why? Because you were doing something that was engaging and probably made you feel something in connection becomes out of that. And there's too few opportunities nowadays, or we don't take advantage of them. So I think, it comes down to, this is why I think ultra running and trail running and running in general can be healthy to a degree, is if you utilize it as something where it's like, hey, I'm going to experience something. And the last thing I'll say on this, because I remember it from decades ago, is I remember in college, I think it was my freshman year in college, we did this just ridiculous hard workout on the track. And we're just all lying down on the ground in pain, writhing and suffering. And I still remember my college coach at the time, just, I guess, I don't know what he was doing, but he was just pontificating. And he's like, hey, when do you think the last time it was that your parents felt anything like this? And he's like, maybe never, or maybe like in high school gym class. And for whatever reason, that stuck with me. But I think there's a degree of truth to that. Is like, it makes us feel something where it's like, holy crap, this is overwhelming, but we have to navigate it. And to some degree, that makes us feel alive.
Wow. Yeah. Now I'm like questioning if my wife and our entire marriage is built on a history of semi-harrowing backcountry adventures.
And I was like, do I actually love my partner, or are we just incredible crew chiefs for each other?
I'll give you another, I'll science nerd it out. But there's some research that shows that on first or second dates, I forget what it was, but if you do something mildly dangerous or mildly uncomfortable, what happens is we get a shot of adrenaline, and then we mistakenly sometimes think and attribute that adrenaline to attraction to the other partner. And we're more likely afterwards to say that, like, yeah, we are attracted to the other partner. There's no data on long-term success of this, but like the point is, like, we feel something and then we're like, oh, we're with this other person, so this must be it. And I think, again, not here to give relationship advice, but again, we need to feel alive to feel something. And sometimes that's helpful in our relationship. Sometimes you might scare someone shitless and they'll think you're crazy and just run away.
That reminds me. Oh, go ahead.
My second date with my current partner, we did the most deadly 14er in Colorado. So now I'm like, man, what have these past 6 years been? What am I doing?
I feel like this is a line in Speed after Sandra Bullock and Keanu like exit the bus, and they say something to that effect that like we built this anyway. But also I remember the study you're talking about, or the data. I found it at some point like 10 or 15 years ago, and then I was going to try to write a story about why mountain guides are good at selling gear. And it's because you've had this intense experience with them, and you're like, well, he had the La Sportiva boots, so I should get those. Or why people fall in love with mountain guides. But that's it. It's that sort of
where trauma bonding meets capitalism. Yeah. It's a match made in heaven.
Yeah. Okay. Wow, that was fascinating.
But it is true, because like we really do build those more like those, or I have felt that like the relationships I have built through trail and ultra running, like the people that I've just been like, oh yeah, you can come crew me, whatever, it's fine. Like if you're not doing anything, and like those are now like the people that like are my like ride or dies for life stuff, because they've like we've trialed and errored in the realm of unimportant ultra running. Like, can you feed me mashed potatoes at 2 a.m. while I cry on the side of the trail? And lo and behold, that self-select group of people are also really great at picking up the phone when you need a friend.
I'm having a couch.
Yeah.
But here's the thing is there's a reason for that, because like we're ourselves, right? You can't fake it at 2 a.m. when someone's feeding you mashed potatoes. You can't fake it when you see someone just done after a hard training session and barely able to walk or get through things, or having, gone on a journey trying to accomplish a goal and then fallen short. Like, you can't fake that emotion and experience. Like, we have to be ourselves. So part of it is like, yeah, we get these like adrenaline rushes and we get these emotions and stuff. But part of it is too, is like, we put down the facade and we are ourselves. And like you all, some of the deepest, craziest conversations I've had have been on really long runs where you've exhausted everything else to talk about, and fatigue has like shut down your maybe rational part of your brain. And you're just like, all right, let's go deep on this subject. And no one has the inhibition to say like, no, we shouldn't. We're on a really freaking long run. And you just go there because like it's part of who you are. And similar to you, like those are the people who I could call years later after having intermittent, conversation with them through the years, and they pick up the phone and we could go right back to that point. And I think, again, it's one of the things that I think speaks of and that I love about the running community is it almost creates the space where you can create bonds in a world outside of it that tells you to like stay on the superficial level and never go to that depth.
It's interesting because I feel like, sometimes I look at trail and ultra runners and I'm not like, that's the mentally healthiest, like most good perspective havingest group of people, like adults who recreationally jog for 30 hours while eating candy in a dark woods. Like, that's not maybe what, like, if I could go back in time and tell myself who to be, I don't know that I would say do that exactly. But also when you sort of contextualize it with like, well, if it's that, or like I'm on my phone and like, I'm over involved in like The Bachelor as like my only means of like feeling a thing and connecting to a community and like trying to like artificially graft meaning onto my life, then like, yeah, maybe I'll take the candy and the jogging.
I mean, that's what it is. Like I think it's like, we all have our things, right? We all have our things that we struggle with. We all have our mental, I don't know, differences or weirdness or whatever have you. And you're gonna fill that void with something, right? And it's not to say like we're all like have these huge voids, but to a degree, like we all have something. And I think like we kind of get to choose. Do you want that compulsion to be, I get up and go run every morning, even in the craziest of weather? Or do you want that compulsion to be, I binge watch whatever show and can't turn it off, or binge TikTok for hours and that's it? And some of us just have a natural tendency to some more of these compulsions or whatever have you. And I think we have to decide, like, sure, we can get better at them, but we also get to decide how we direct those. And I'll tell you, like, as a high school kid, like the best thing that happened to me was like having some weird compulsion to like get up and run 15 miles a day, even though it drove my parents freaking nuts. Because if not, I can just imagine like where I would have directed that elsewhere. And many of those spots would not have been like beneficial for me for the long time, or like productive for my mental health. So to a degree, like, yeah, we choose our vices. But it's better to have a vice. Yeah.
For me, it's this or Fight Club. So jogging it is.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm here for.
This is the healthy cult.
Yeah.
Yes, we're in the good cult.
It's
Well,
you can wear whatever shoes you want.
I think it was, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's in the book where David Foster Wallace essentially says that. He says
you have to everyone worships something. And
yeah,
like, if you don't acknowledge that you're worshiping something, then that's how you start to like worship money or your looks or your youth or something that you will lose.
Bingo. And that's it. And I think that at least you go in with, eyes wide open and say like, hey, yeah, it's a little weird that I spend so much time running so much, but like, whatever, it's better than like worshiping XYZ or not having any control over what I worship and think that I'm making all these choices. And meanwhile, I'm just being, pushed and pulled in these different directions by whatever capitalistic thing has grabbed my attention and identity.
Yeah. I have one more question that's very non-philosophical, Steve.
Right the ship, Brendan.
Yeah.
Get us out of David Foster Wallace territory.
No, you put together this great YouTube video a few months ago called "The Truth About Long Runs: Your Comprehensive Guide," and it's great. It's 20 minutes long, and there's all sorts of stuff in it. I guess I would like you to answer this for our audience, but if we're ultra marathon runners training and we're busy and we have jobs and families and all this stuff, and sometimes we don't get in all the runs that we would like to during the week. Is it good, or is it a good idea to still emphasize that long run in our training? Like, as long as I get that done when I'm training for my 50K or 50-mile race, am I in a good spot? Is that healthy, I guess, is my question to you as a coach.
Oh man, you're putting me on the coaching, stance.
Wait,
here.
You can just plead you can say no, thank you. I don't want to answer that one.
No. Here's what I'll say, and this is my coaching cop out, but it just kind of depends.
Yeah.
Is for some people, no, it's not healthy, where you just put all of your weight on the long run and think like, thank God, like I've got this in, I'm going to save this. And no, that's not healthy because you're probably going to end up overdoing it to some degree. It reminds me of a high school teammate I had a long time ago who, we had weekly mileage and he said, oh, I'm just going to front load it. And like Monday and Tuesday, just cram miles. And I'm like, well, I guess that kind of gets at the point, but like, this seems like it's going to backfire. And it did, because like what matters is the training stimulus that you're getting. And are you adapting to it? And if all of a sudden I'm just saying, okay, on the weekend, I'm just doing a long run and I forgot about everything else, like your body's kind of probably going to go like, holy crap, what in the hell did you put me through? Like, I can't adapt to this. At some point, you might survive it. So that's number one. But it also depends. Like, if you have a long history of consistent mileage or consistent training, then you probably can get away with overemphasizing the long run and underemphasizing everything else, because you've got years and years of like aerobic foundation where your body's like, hey, yeah, I've been doing mileage for a really long time. And like, we're going to go into maintenance mode, and maintenance mode means a long run. And I've done a lot of long runs over the years. So like, we can get away with reduced training during the week and a solid long run and be adapted to it and have a somewhat lower injury risk because we've done it for a really long time. So I think the context kind of depends. What I would say over anything is like, if you're struggling to get in the training, then like ask yourself like, well, what is the thing that I can do consistently? How do I get a consistent volume in that is appropriate? And maybe that's less than ideal. But the point is like, not to be all over the place, but to figure out, okay, what can I consistently do every week? And that might change based on the season of life and training I'm in.
Great answer. Thanks.
He said you might survive it, Brendan. That's huge for training.
I am just like, we have a toddler and I get sick every month and like, definitely miss a few days of a week. And like, if I can just run 20 miles this weekend, I'm sure I can finish the 50K,
I'm right there with you. We've got a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. So
Great.
My training is like all over the place. So I have those thoughts too, but you just do the best you can, and there is no ideal training with a toddler, and you're never gonna really adapt to anything because everything
Awesome.
just kills you. So best of luck.
I just want to say, I hope you don't get hand, foot, and mouth disease. That's been my least favorite of all of them.
We haven't, but my sister-in-law, who also has a toddler, just came down from that, or just got that. So we've had pictures, and we're just like, do not visit us for an extended period of time. Stay away.
So bad. Top 5 things I would wish upon my worst enemies, honestly. Yeah.
Hand, foot, and mouth disease in a long run that you may or may not survive.
Yes, that's the title of this podcast. Yeah.
Well, speaking of mental toughness, Steve, you've written a lot about mental toughness and like what our culture, and particularly this like sort of like pseudo masculine sports culture, David Goggins, stay hard culture gets wrong about mental toughness and what like the science is actually showing mental toughness is. Could you speak to that? Because I feel like this is something that ultra runners are obsessed with. Like, we really like to think of ourselves as a very hardened people until we have to miss our Thursday run because of hand, foot, and mouth disease.
Absolutely. I mean, here's the deal. I respect David Goggins, not trying to hate on him. But what happens is when you view mental toughness as this like stay hard, like push through everything, like all of the things that we know, what it's like is it's like giving you a hammer and say like, this will solve all of your problems. And again, if you remember back to the beginning of the podcast, what did I say about Frank Shorter and his bros who dominated the marathon? It was flexibility that mattered. Nothing always works. You need all sorts of tools. And to me, again, it's not just Frank Shorter. The research backs this up. The better we are at flexibly navigating things, meaning being able to sometimes say like, hey, whatever, this sucks, I'm just going to have to tolerate it for a while. Other times being able to zoom out and give ourselves perspective. Other times saying like, yeah, I really do want to quit. And that's a real feeling. Like, I'm going to have to like navigate that and consider that. And then other times saying like, you know what, it sucks. I'm going to break it down and say, hey, in a mile, I can quit. And then I get a mile and I say, no, in the next mile, I'll quit. No, at the next aid station. And you literally bargain with yourself. And again, what overwhelmingly research tells us is that we need a wide variety of tools because all we're trying to do in all mental toughness is we feel something, some sort of discomfort, some sort of pain, fatigue, stress. And that voice in our head or that feeling pushes us to find the simplest like way to deal with that, which is often like avoid, quit, stop, slow down, whatever it is, right? And we just have to create enough space to navigate it. And what I mean by space is sometimes literally we have to be like, okay, like I get it. That's my devil on my shoulder, but I'm not going to David Goggins scream at it. I'm just going to meditation it and be like, yeah, that's kind of the crazy voice that shows up at 40 miles into a 50-mile, race. Like that's normal, but that doesn't reflect who I am. So I'm going to let that voice float on by. So to me, like toughness is like give yourself the opportunity to develop this diverse array of skills and don't think that you have to take the like hammer, stay hard to every single problem, because if you do, you're probably going to fail, or more so, like you're probably going to put yourself in a situation where you do something dumb where you should have said like, you know what? Like, I really should have quit that race. Like, now maybe I'm injured and I can't run for months because, like, my whatever knee was screaming at me that, hey, you idiot, this isn't fatigue or soreness. Like, I am literally torn. Listen to me.
I stayed hard, but my femur didn't.
Right.
He died
my
doing
femur
what he
did
loved.
not.
Yeah. Staying hard.
Dragging my carcass across the finish line at 3 a.m.
Yep. It's very beautiful. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, those are all the questions I had for you, Steve. Anything else from you, Brendan? Any more free coaching you need here while we've got them?
No. Yeah. You know what? Actually, there's a point in a book. I had one more thing that if we can throw it in, but you were talking about being in a gym in Albuquerque looking out the window at this public park and seeing all the treadmills were like full of people, even though it was this beautiful 60-degree day out in Albuquerque. And this is an entry point into saying, you know, I'm just going to read from the book. We see exercise as productive work, so we go to the gym and labor through the torture of a treadmill when nature is right there calling us to explore. Research by researchers found that when we see leisure as unproductive, it reduces our enjoyment of that activity. It's no wonder adults are horrible at play. And then you talk about giving yourself recess a few times per day, like a kid would. Is there anything you could just talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the productivity optimization cult that we see around us, is that when we make our life about productivity, everything becomes work. Everything becomes a job. You can see this even in our sleep data. Like there's, I forget the name of it, but there's literally in the journals, medical journals, they diagnose it where we have anxiety around
orthosomnia.
There you go. Orthosomnia. We have anxiety around our sleep trackers because we're so worried that we need to have that perfect sleep score that it is getting in the way of helping us do the thing that it's supposed to help us do, sleep. And this is the natural end result when we think everything has to be like productive. It's why people go to the gym instead of, you know, the park nearby, because exercise is seen as like, I have to do this because like this is going to help me lose weight or get my fitness tracker improved or meet my steps or whatever the stupid thing and measure is. And I just think it makes us miserable. And what it does is it doesn't develop the motivation that allows us to actually sustain that activity. And think about it. Like none of us are lifelong runners because we're like, oh, I need to improve my watch VO2 max score. No, like we're lifelong runners because like even though we may enjoy racing and competing and all that stuff, like there's something about the activity that pulls on us internally to do the stupid thing for, years and decades sometimes. Okay. And the only way we get there is by having some degree of fun or some degree of play or what I call recess, which is just, what is it? It's we go play outside. If you watch kids at recess, they go play outside for the intrinsic joy and worth of the activity, not because they're like, oh, if I win the recess kickball game, that's going to make me a pro kickball player and get a college scholarship. No, it doesn't matter. Right? The next day we'll play a different game and everything will change. And I think that's what we need as adults is more time where it's like, hey, just do the thing. Right. And one more story on this is, I know who taught me this really well is professional runner Natasha Rogers, who I coach right now, but I've worked with off and on through the years. And I remember when she was coming back from a long extended break and injury and just kind of hating running, is we were talking about, okay, well, we need to do some workouts. So let's start to do some workouts. And she's like, that just gives me a lot of stress, because I'm going to look at the watch and realize how much slower I was than at my peak. And I was like, well, what would make it exciting? And she's like, well, if I just took the watch off and I just said, hey, I'm going to run hard during these loops at this local park and choose when I get to stop and maybe stop at a tree and then jog to the next, tree and sprint again and sprint up the hill and jog at the top. And like, great, let's do that for a couple of weeks. And then I'm going to bet you're going to be fitter. And then at some point you're going to be like, hey, I'm not that slow on these mile repeats. We can reintroduce the watch. And that taught me such a valuable lesson, which is like, even in our own sport, again, we can treat it like a job that is like driving us nuts, or we can get back to the original meaning of fartlek, which is speed, play, and kind of play at it. And as a dad of, again, 2 kids at 2 or under, like this is my life. I'm like pushing a stroller and going slow because it's hard to run fast. And I'm like, all right, we got to do a workout, and I don't want my toddler screaming. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to start at our house and then run a really hard 1,000 meters to the duck pond. And then she's going to get out and watch the ducks for a couple minutes. And if I'm lucky, it'll be longer, so I get some recovery. And then we're going to sprint from there, or run really hard from there to the swing set at the next park, which is like a mile away. And that's the workout. And it's kind of play.
I feel you in a very specific way. This story. I'm trying to get our transition time at daycare down, so I just leave my watch running. But empty stroller versus full jogging stroller. Wow, what a difference! Just pushing air. It's great.
Key to fitness, right there. Just get an empty stroller.
I mean, I close the top too, so drivers will respect me, and like I think he's still in there. So
wow, that guy's really fast.
Well, if they see an empty stroller, I think they might not stop and let me cross the street. So they're like,
true.
"Oh, what are you doing?" Nah.
This seems like evidence of a crime.
Yeah. So. Oh, I'm good. I'm good if you are, Zoe.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been so cool to pick your brain about running hard, thinking hard, and how to have more fun.
Thanks so much for having me. This was an absolute blast.
Thanks, Steve.